The referees have done it again, and it's all thanks to the NFL. The Lions have now lost single-handedly to the NFL refs once again, and this is something that we've seen. It's happened over and over again for easily the last decade through different games. You go back to the game against Chicago years ago with the invention of the Calvin Johnson rule. Then you fast forward to the game in the playoffs against Dallas on the pass interference call that never was against Brandon Pettigrew. Then you go to the call in Seattle where the guy tapped the ball out of bounds, out of the back of the end zone that never was called. Then you go to the game in 2015 against the Packers, which they ironically showed last night, knowing darn well the same kind of thing was probably going to happen to the Lions again. They would have been right. But they showed it again last night, and it was the play where they called the Lions for the face mask call that wasn't there just because, his finger taps the face mask of Aaron Rodgers. Never hooked it, never grabbed it, just tapped it with a finger, and they called him for that. And then, obviously, Green Bay got another shot, and Richard Rodgers went up and made the catch in the middle of the end zone against half the Lions' defense. But it really is becoming almost like a sickness that the NFL has where they almost can't seem to help themselves at this point. You know, it's like if they don't do this to the Lions on an almost weekly basis at this point, it's almost like they can't help themselves but to do it. And I think for myself as a fan, not just of the Lions, but football in general, it's really, I think, gotten to the final straw where they've just completely turned me off from watching the NFL the rest of the season, because I found myself sitting there last night with about 5 minutes left in the game and the Packers got the ball back, and I said, oh yeah, the Lions are not getting this ball back, so they have to do everything in their power to make sure they stop them, which they did twice. But the referees decided, you know what? It's third down. If the Lions stop them here, the game's essentially over. So, and we can't have that because Aaron Rodgers needs to win this game. Because if he doesn't, that'll just kill our ratings, which will kill the NFL's revenue. And it's all about the money. So they throw 2 hands to the face penalties against Trey Flowers. Keep in mind, Trey Flowers going into last night had never been called for illegal hands to the face once in his professional career. And he was called twice, I believe, on the same possession to end the game last night. And if you go back and watch either of those replays of the so-called hands to the face penalties, nowhere was his hand near the face mask of that left tackle. In fact, on the one, they called it against Flowers when the left tackle had his hands all over Flowers' face mask, to the point where it was just blatantly obvious. So, too, was the pass interference call that never was against Marvin Jones on his defensive back, where he turns to look for the ball. The defensive back doesn't. The defensive back just takes his right arm and swats Marvin Jones out of the air like a rag doll. But that wasn't pass interference. Oh, no. That was the defensive back making a great play on the ball that was still 10 yards downfield. So I'm just sick of the NFL refs kind of being selective. Not even kind of. They are being selective of when they want to throw flags for things that are clearly penalties and when they want to just believe that something happened even though it never did. And they brought up the point again last night about how if we're going to review pass interference, which I don't know how the Lions didn't review that pass interference call on Marvin Jones, but they kept saying if they're going to review pass interference, we need to review things like illegal hands to the face, because calls like that changed that game. Because if I'm remembering correctly, both those calls were on third down after the Packers failed to convert. And ironically, the flags were thrown right as the play was ending. Not when the penalty supposedly occurred, but once the play was conveniently ending and the Lions seemingly stopped them on third down. But they talked about the fact that these different sorts of penalties that are these game-changing calls need to have some sort of review in place if we're going to be reviewing pass interference as well. And I think in a game like that last night, it just proved that you need it. Because I think that for a lot of people with this pass interference review, they were saying, oh, this is going to be terrible. It's going to slow the game down so much. Now we're just nitpicking things. Well, no, these refs have shown time and time again that they need to be nitpicked because they consistently get this stuff wrong to the point where you watched the game last night. You cannot convince me that these refs weren't somehow, some way, to some degree, fixing this game. I mean, the calls or the no calls or the calls that they made up that weren't really there was just completely blatantly obvious. Like there was no hiding what they were doing because they made the calls or didn't make the calls in some of the biggest situations of the game, i.e. the 2 hands to the face phantom calls against Trey Flowers in the last 5 minutes of the game. So if you're going to pull some crap like this, do a better job of hiding it, because at this point, they're not even trying to hide it anymore. They're just blatantly throwing it out there on national television on Monday Night Football saying, hey, look, we're in the NFL's bag. We're going to make damn sure Aaron Rodgers and the Packers win this game at home on Monday Night Football. And then we're going to show them after the game doing the Lambeau Leap. We're going to interview Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur. And we're going to show them doing the Lambeau Leap because there's no way in hell we're letting the Lions win this game. But in watching that game, the Lions were the better team. Now, there's some people, I'm not going to name names, I'll leave that up to you, but there's some people that'll say, oh, I don't care about field goals, they needed touchdowns. You know, touchdowns are worth more. Yeah, no kidding. And I would agree with that. But the Lions did what they had to do to win that game while still hitting 5 field goals. Prater was in big game mode last night, hitting them from 50 plus, making them look like extra points. So normally I would agree, and I think anybody who knows basic math can agree, that yes, touchdowns are better than field goals because they're worth more. No kidding. But that's not the end-all, be-all. You can still win a football game without scoring 7 touchdowns. It is completely possible. The Lions did enough as far as putting up points on the board last night to win that football game. Their defense did enough to where they put themselves in a position to win. I can't help it that the refs just seemingly don't care. That the NFL has essentially become ratings whores, that they would rather the Packers win by essentially cheating than letting a team like the Lions, who deserve to win that football game, letting them win a game that they rightfully deserved. And to me, quite frankly, and I tweeted this several times last night following the game, it's quite frankly disgusting is what it really is. It's disgusting that as a football fan, I wasted 3 hours of my life last night watching that game, knowing damn well in the final 5 minutes the Lions were never getting that ball back. You could have done anything short of picking Aaron Rodgers up with the football and carrying him down the field to the end zone for a safety. There was no way the Lions were getting that ball back. And I found myself actually kind of sick watching those last 5 minutes, knowing that the game was essentially over and the Lions were going to lose. And there was almost nothing they could have done about it. Like, what more could you want? They stopped them twice on 3rd down, and the refs found a way, or I should say Aaron Rodgers found a way to engineer that scoring drive to win the game. Yeah, I'm not buying it. And like I said, quite frankly, I think that last night was the last NFL game that I'm going to watch at least for the rest of the season. Because I cannot find it within me to care about a game that's already over before the players go out for the opening coin toss. It's just absolutely disgusting. I'll stick to my Saturday weekly heart attacks with Michigan football trying to get through these next couple games against Penn State and Notre Dame, both now under the lights. One this weekend at Penn State, then Michigan comes back home to the big house in about a week and a half against Notre Dame, which I will talk about them next, coming up on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back in. Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. The final point I wanted to get to that I forgot to mention before the break, the final word I want to get in on this Lions versus the NFL refs thing is that it's sad that the refs can influence a game like this, and they do it now on an almost weekly basis, as I mentioned in the segment. But they do it on almost a weekly basis. They make these kind of boneheaded calls or no calls, or they frankly just make stuff up as they go along. Like, that's the thing. Can the NFL get refs that actually know how to referee a game, like that actually understand the rules of football and how to properly apply them to an in-game situation? Because these clowns that they trot out there every week have proven that they have no clue what they're doing. No clue. But the final thing I wanted to get on this is that they'll do this. They almost make a habit of it now. And there's no repercussion that comes back on them. They don't get fined. The players get fined for doing things on and off the field. The refs don't get fined for crap. The refs pull this kind of stuff every single week. Nothing happens to them. They don't get fined. They get nothing. If anything, after yesterday, those refs probably got their Christmas bonus a little early this year for that performance. So good job. But anyway, I'm done with that. I can't get into that anymore. I'm officially done with, I think, NFL football for 2019. So it was fun while it lasted. We got about a month in. But good Lord. So the other thing I wanted to get to today is Michigan football, talking about the game against Illinois on Saturday, which I didn't really watch any of. I had other things going on that day, but I did go back and watch a lot of the highlights. I actually found on YouTube like this 11-minute highlight video, which I thought was kind of excessive, but for somebody that didn't watch the game, I thought it really helped. It kind of filled in a lot of the gaps from, statistics I had read on the game and, the general discussion on Twitter and things like that afterwards. And one of the things I noticed was that they were able to run the football at a very high level. They averaged about 6 yards a carry. They ran for almost 300 yards against Illinois. So that's one thing that statistically, without having watched the game, really kind of blew my mind, because I think it doesn't really matter who you played. You played a Division I Power 5 football team and ran for almost 300 yards. You ran for 6 yards a carry. I don't care who it's against, short of maybe Rutgers. Anytime you do that against a Power 5 team, that's impressive. So I went back, I went back on, I believe it was Sunday, and watched some of the highlights from that game, and really what they were able to do up front on the offensive line, the kind of blocking schemes and stuff they ran, there wasn't a whole lot special to it. They didn't have these crazy, wild blocking schemes and things like that. What they did was actually pretty fundamental and basic, but the way they ran it was so efficient. And I talked about it last week on the podcast. One of the biggest things holding this team back outside of the turnovers was the execution, because I think everybody complains about the play calling and this and that with Josh Gaddis. I haven't had a problem with the play calling the past few weeks. It's just that the execution to me hasn't been where it needs to be. And I think against Illinois, for the most part, you saw that the execution was starting to be there. You started seeing the, I think, identity of what this football team is. And I finally came to terms with that on Sunday when I watched the highlights. This isn't a team that's going to spread it out like we originally thought, with 4 or 5 receivers in a formation. They're not going to throw it like 30 plus times a game. This is a team that's going to run it 40 to 50 times a game, depending on how successful I think they are. but they're going to run it 40 to 50 times a game. They're going to throw it about 20, maybe 25 at most. It's going to be a very controlled game where they're going to put an emphasis on running the football like you saw them do against Illinois and what they tried to do against Iowa the week prior. The only difference was the execution was there against Illinois. And I think from watching the games that Penn State played, and I watched a couple minutes of Notre Dame, but especially against Penn State this weekend, Michigan's going to have their chances to score in that game. Penn State didn't especially wow me like I thought they would, but I also mentioned it on the podcast last week. I don't think Penn State, up until this past Saturday, had really played anybody that was worth noting on their schedule to say, wow, they really manhandled that team, and that's a good team. They went out against Iowa. They struggled. It was one of those games where they probably could have lost, maybe should have lost, but they found a way to pull it out. And I don't mean in a way that, Aaron Rodgers was able to pull it out last night. Like, they actually found a way. They actually found a way to go out there and get it done on the road at night against Iowa, which is a very tough place to play in the Big Ten. But going back to Michigan, I think that these next two games are definitely winnable. They don't scare me as much as they did a few weeks ago. They still scare me because I think that there is still a very good chance they lose both of them, but they don't scare me to the point they did a few weeks ago, especially with the hope that this offense is kind of, turning this corner now as we get into the back half of the regular season. And, they're starting to really figure things out. They're kind of figuring out that identity that we've talked about so much. I've seen a lot on Twitter, people talking about what the identity of this offense is going to be, or at least what is it supposed to be, like what are they working towards. I think against Illinois, you finally saw them kind of turn that corner and say, this is who we are as an offense. This is what we want to do. Here's how we're going to attack you. Just try and stop us. And really, it was funny because they really ran like 4 plays in a lot of the highlights I watched, but every time they ran it, it was out of basically the same formation. Maybe a receiver was lined up on one side versus the other, whatever, but it was generally the same formation every time, and every time they ran it was a different result. One time they'd hand it off up the middle, the next time they'd, roll out and throw on the run. Patterson rolling out to his right, like I mentioned I wanted to see from him on the podcast last week, going to his right. He threw 2 or 3 of his touchdowns on a play action pass rolling to his right. Like, where's that been all season? It looked great. I thought they ran it beautifully. I'd love to see them do that against Penn State and Notre Dame, and I'm sure because they saw it last week and said, hey, we can actually do this. I think we will see more of that going forward, but I think that really is their identity. They're going to put 5 men on the line. They're going to bring a tight end either to the left or the right. The running back's going to be opposite of wherever the tight end is. Or excuse me, he's going to be on the same side as the tight end. They're going to bring the tight end across the formation, and then whatever side they're running to, if the running back's going to the left or the right, the line's going to block that way, and the tight end's going to block the opposite way. He's going to come across the formation. That's basically all they ran against Illinois in that game. Was the offensive line goes one way, the tight end goes the other, the hole opens up, running back runs through the hole. It's just that simple. If Patterson wants to keep it and get outside the pocket, he now has the tight end leading for him in front. So it's not like they did anything crazy. It's not like they got all creative with it and really opened up the playbook. But I think they did 1 or 2 things in that game, and they made sure that they did those 1 or 2 things at a high level. They did those things really well. They executed very well. But now I want to see them go out and do it against Penn State. I want to see them go out and do it against Notre Dame. Michigan State, I'm not too worried about. I think that they've essentially been exposed the past couple weeks by Indiana, Ohio State, and Wisconsin. Weird to think that Indiana actually exposed a team like Michigan State defensively, but they did. I thought Michael Penix looked really solid in that game, and that's a game that Indiana, again, probably could have won. So I do feel a little better than I did a few weeks ago about where Michigan is going forward the remainder of the season. I think that some of these games that were once believed to be impossible games to win are looking a little more like they could go either way. I think the Penn State game will be one of those, 24-20 type games. It's just a matter of who gets 24 and who gets 20. But I think it's not going to be a game that you see get up in the 30s or get up in the 40s. I think it'll be, first 1 to 20 wins. But I think that for me with Michigan, their offense has sort of turned the corner and started taking steps in the right direction. I think your top 3 running backs after the Illinois game that I want to see the rest of the season, your top 2 by far are Charbonnet and Hassan Haskins. I'd say the other one is True Wilson. I could easily go the rest of the season not seeing Christian Turner step foot on the field, because the minute I heard him go out there against Illinois a couple days ago, I was driving in my car listening to the game. The minute they said he checked into the game, I was like, yeah, he'll fumble. And about 10 seconds later, that statement held true. Now, I wasn't happy about it, but I called it. But yeah, I'd say easily right now your top 2 are Charbonnet and Hassan Haskins. I want to see those guys, if you're going to run it 40 to 50 times a game, like I suspect they are, I want to see each of those guys getting damn near 20 carries, which I know is a lot, but I'd rather have 2 guys out there that I know can get the job done and won't fumble the football half the time than going running back by committee with 4 deep and half the guys can barely hold on to the football. I'd run those guys until they just can't run anymore, and then you can put in True Wilson for a snap or 2. But I could not care less about seeing Christian Turner on the football field the rest of the season on offense. Not that that's anything against him personally. I just think he's had way too many issues fumbling the football. It's almost been Ty Isaac-esque. If you remember a few years ago, Ty Isaac had the same issues. I think you just need to sit him down and get him right, because you cannot keep wasting possessions because your 3rd/4th string running back can't hold on to the football. But I think overall my thoughts on Michigan's season as a whole still hold true. I think that they still need to somehow find a way to dig it out and get to 9 wins on the season. I think the Penn State game definitely looks more winnable now. I think having Notre Dame, at night at home in that kind of environment is a winnable game after what we saw against USC, where they were up big and then allowed USC to kind of claw their way back into that game. And it ended up being 30-27, I believe, after Notre Dame was up 20-6 at one point. So you really allowed them to stick around in that game and almost have a chance at it. But I still believe that you got to win 2 out of the 4 against Penn State, Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State, and then you got to take care of business against the teams like Indiana and Maryland the rest of the way. You already got Iowa and Illinois out of the way. Now that's what you need to do. You got to take down Indiana. You got to beat Maryland, which I think they will, and then you at least got to get 2 out of the 4, right? That's what's going to get you to 9. And for me, if you get to 9-3, you go to a bowl game, you got to win that one, get to 10-3, get your Jim Harbaugh special at 10-3. I really love that phrase too, the Jim Harbaugh special. But you go out there, you go 10-3. I can live with 10-3, because let's face it, it's a lot better than what Michigan State's staring at right now when they're 4-3 and they still got games left against Penn State and Michigan State in their own division. They're easily staring down a 7-5 season right now after going 7-6 a year ago, and not all that far removed from a 3-9 season in 2016. but I'll leave that up for a future podcast episode devoted to talking about the decaying corpse that is the Michigan State football program under Mark D'Antonio. But that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I really needed to vent about that Lions game last night and the injustice that was served to them once again on a like I said, on a weekly basis by the NFL referees, and just how disgusting it is that they expect the fans to sit through that kind of crap every single week. And then I also wanted to update you on my thoughts on Michigan and where they're at versus where they're going the rest of the season, as not only has their offense turned a corner, I think, this season, but I think myself as a fan has also kind of turned that corner to where I can kind of see this thing going to a better place than where I saw it just a few weeks ago. So that'll do it on episode 2 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Thanks for listening.